Buddha's words on the three characteristics. Direct knowledge of the three characteristics. Monks. When what exists owing to what, by adhering to what, does such a view as this arise? This is mine, this I am, this is myself. When there is form, feeling, perception, volitional formation, consciousness owing to form, consciousness, by adhering to form, consciousness, such a view as this arises. This is mine, I am, this is myself. Monks. Whichever ascetics and Brahmins who regard the self in various manifold ways, all regard as self the five aggregates subject to clinging, or a certain one among them. What five? Here the uninstructed worldling regards form as self, or self as possessing form, or form as in self, or self as in form. He regards feeling, perception, volitional formations, consciousness as self, or self as possessing consciousness, or consciousness as in self, or self as in consciousness. This way of regarding things becomes their firm belief: I exist. Monks. Physical form is impermanent. Whatever is impermanent is dukkha. Whatever is dukkha is non-self. Whatever is non-self should be seen as it truly is, with correct wisdom thus: this is not mine, I am not this is not myself. The same for feeling, perception, volitional formations, and consciousness. Monks. Physical form is impermanent, oppressive, dukkha, and non-self. So too the causes for the arising of physical form are impermanent, oppressive, and non-self. As physical form has originated from causes that are impermanent, oppressive, and non-self, how could it be permanent, easeful, or self? The same for feeling, perception, volitional formations, and consciousness. But friend, a learned, noble disciple, who has seen the noble ones and is skilled and well trained in their teaching, who has seen the worthy ones and is skilled and well trained in their teaching, does not regard physical form as self, or self as possessing form, or form as in self, or self as in form. He does not regard feeling as self, perception as self, volitional formations as self, consciousness as self, or self as in possessing consciousness, or consciousness as in self, or self as in consciousness. He understands it as it truly is: impermanent form as impermanent form, impermanent consciousness as impermanent consciousness. He understands as it truly is: stressful, dukkha, form as stressful form, stressful consciousness as stressful consciousness. He understands as it truly is: selfless form as selfless form, selfless consciousness as selfless consciousness. He understands as it truly is: conditioned form as conditioned form, conditioned consciousness as conditioned consciousness. He understands as it truly is: debilitating form as debilitating form, debilitating consciousness as debilitating consciousness. He does not assume, grasp, or determine form as myself. He does not assume feeling, perception, volitional formations, consciousness. He does not grasp or determine it as myself. Not grasped or attached to these five aggregates of clinging lead to his long-lasting welfare and happiness. How, householder, is one afflicted in body and afflicted in mind? Here an untaught ordinary person, who has not seen the noble ones, and is unskilled and undisciplined in their teaching, regards physical form, feeling, perception, volitional formations, and consciousness as self, regards self as possessing form, regards form in self, regards self in form, regards self in consciousness. He lives obsessed by the notions: I am form, I am feeling, my feeling, I am perception, my perception, I am volitional formations, my volitional formations, I am consciousness, my consciousness. As he lives obsessed by these notions, that form consciousness of his changes and alters. With the change and alteration of form, feeling, perception, volitional formations, and consciousness, there arises in him sorrow, lamentation, pain, grief, and despair. And how householder is one afflicted in body, but not afflicted in mind. Here the instructed noble disciple does not regard physical form, feeling, perception, volitional formations, and consciousness as self, regard self as possessing form, regard form in self, regard self in form, regard self in consciousness. He does not live obsessed by the notions: I am form, I am feeling, my feeling, I am perception, my perception, I am volitional formations, my volitional formations, I am consciousness, my consciousness. As he lives unobsessed by these notions, that form consciousness of his changes and alters. With the change and alteration of form, feeling, perception, volitional formations, and consciousness, there do not arise in him sorrow, lamentation, pain, grief, and despair. How, monks, is there non-agitation through non-clinging? Here an uninstructed noble disciple does not regard physical form as self, self as possessing form, self in form, or form in self. That form of his changes and alters, despite the change and alteration of form. His consciousness is not preoccupied with this physical change. No agitation and constellation of mental states, Dhamma Samupada, arising from preoccupation with physical change, remains overpowering his mind. Because his mind is not overpowered, he is not frightened, distressed, or anxious, and through non-clinging he does not become agitated. The same for feeling, perception, volitional formations, and consciousness. Monks, when one has understood the impermanence, alteration, fading away, and cessation of physical form, and when one sees as it truly is, with correct wisdom, thus form, both past and present, is impermanent, dukkha, and subject to change, then one abandons sorrow, lamentation, pain, grief, and despair. By abandoning sorrow, despair, one is not agitated. Unagitated one dwells happily. A monk who dwells happily is said to be quenched in that respect, Tadanga Nibbudha. The same for feeling, perception, volitional formations, and consciousness. An untaught ordinary person reflects unwisely, ayoniso manasikara. Thus, in the far-reaching past, did I exist? Did I not exist? What was I? How was I? Having been what did I become? In the far-reaching future, will I exist? Will I not exist? What will I be? How will I be? Having been what will I become? Or else he doubts about the present, thus: do I exist or do I not exist? What am I? How am I? Where has this being come from? Where will it go? When he reflects unwisely in this way, one of the 6 views arises in him. There arises the view or belief as true and real. I have a self, I do not have a self, I perceive the self by way of the self, I perceive non-self by way of the self. I perceive the self by way of non-self, or else he has some such view as this: it is this self of mine that direct, feels and experiences here and there the fruits of good and bad actions. It is permanent, stable, eternal, not subject to change, and it will endure like this forever. Monks. This speculative view is called the thicket of views, the wilderness of views, the disturbance of views, the wriggling of views, the fetter of views, fettered by the fetter of views. The untaught ordinary person is not freed from birth, aging and death, from sorrow, lamentation, pain, grief and despair. He is not freed from suffering, I say. Monks, a well-taught noble disciple, understands what things are fit for reflection and what things are unfit for reflection. He does not reflect on those things unfit for reflection, and he reflects on those things fit for reflection. What are the things unfit for reflection that he does not reflect on? They are the things such that when he reflects on them, the unarisen taints of sensual lust, becoming, and ignorance arise in him, and the risen taints increase. These are the things unfit for reflection that a noble disciple does not reflect on. And what are the things fit for reflection that a noble disciple reflects on? They are the things such that when he reflects on them, the unarisen taints of sensual lust, becoming, and ignorance do not arise, and the risen taints are abandoned. These are the things fit for reflection that he reflects on. By not reflecting on things unfit for reflection, and by reflecting on things fit for reflection, unarisen taints do not arise in him, and the risen taints are abandoned. That noble disciple reflects wisely, yoni so manasikara, thus: this is suffering, this is the cause of suffering, this is the cessation of suffering. This is the way to the cessation of suffering. When he reflects wisely in this way, three fetters are abandoned in him: personality view, sakaya ditthi, doubt, vicikiccha, and adherence to rules and observances, sila bhatta paramasa.